All right, hello everybody. Welcome to Paradigm Technology and Informatica's webinar, CCPA, A Roadmap to Compliance. Please note that all attendees are muted. You do, however, have access to a Q&A board where you can submit any questions, which will then be addressed at the end of the webinar during our Q&A session. The session will be recorded and made available within 24 hours. Chris, I'll hand it off to you to get us started.
Excellent, thank you, Nicola. Hello and welcome. Hey, we have Paradigm and Informatica. Thank you for taking the time to think about CCPA with us. And we hope that you and your families are healthy and safe in these challenging times. Consumer privacy, the United States, the world, is a patchwork quilt of legislation around consumer privacy, with things like GDPR, HIPAA, Graham-Leach-Bailey. There's way too many legislations to count. The California Consumer Privacy Act, also known as CCPA, is not the first nor will be the last. It was about this time last year that the European authorities started assessing millions of euros in fines for GDPR. That really woke everybody up in the business world to the financial impacts these regulations will have. As of July 1st, CCPA can start assessing fines, and the fines will probably be no different. Today, we're excited to discuss CCPA and our roadmap to compliance. We will be diving deeper into a recent white paper that we jointly published with Informatica. I'm Chris Gately, Chief Revenue Officer of Paradigm. We'll be moderating today's discussion with my esteemed colleagues, Jerry Calvanese, Senior Principal Architect at Informatica, and Marcus Kane, Data Governance Practice Lead here at Paradigm. Gentlemen, it's a pleasure to be with you today, healthy and safe. Please introduce yourselves to our guests and let them know your great experience.
Sure, thanks, Chris. Definitely excited about getting a chance to present with you guys, given some of the great work that we've done lately on a number of different projects. But as Chris mentioned, I'm with Informatica. I led the team when we launched the CCPA initiative here at Informatica, looking at what technology would be the best fit, how best to implement it, some kind of best practices, some gotchas, things to look out for, and we'll walk through some of that today. Thanks.
Hi there, my name is Marcus Kane. My background is over 20 years in the data space, providing a range of different data services to a wide range of blue chip clients. And overall, I have a fair amount of experience in data governance solutions, as well as data lineage and metadata management solutions.
Excellent. Thanks, Marcus and Jerry. Look forward to digging into our discussion today. Our agenda is pretty straightforward, gang. It's what is CCPA? What are some of the challenges and best practices we've seen with some of our clients and we're seeing across the spectrum? What's the framework to tackle some of these regulations? And a demonstration of some of the tools that have really been effective in driving the key outcomes that you're looking for. As Nicola mentioned, Q&A is out there. Please feel free to jump in and ask questions as we go along, and we'll try to answer them along the way. We'll also have a Q&A wrap up at the end. Well, CCPA is now in effect and can be fully enforced. The wait and see game is officially over, and organizations must be compliant in order to avoid fines and avoid impacting your brands through negative publicity. Let's dig into some of the highlights. You know, California, a while back, California recognized privacy as an inalienable right. They put a number of legislations in place throughout the years to protect that. What they found is with today's technology, it's just developed so far that they needed to create a new legislation. That one's CCPA. It allows California consumers to own, control, and secure their personal information. The bill went into effect January 1. Obviously, enforcement began July 1st. And who it really impacts from a business standpoint, it's a business that is anywhere in the world, but it has to have three key criteria. First, the business has to earn $50 million in annual revenue. Second, it needs to either sell at least 100,000 consumer records per year, or derive 50% of its revenue from selling personal information. And third, lastly, more than 150 California users visiting its website daily is a requirement. What's the impact? Well, intentional noncompliance includes fines up to $7,500 per violation. And consumers have the opportunity as well to seek direct damages anywhere between $100 to $750 per incident per consumer. So those fines can add up pretty quickly. You know, oftentimes people ask, hey, what's the difference between CCPA and GDPR? Is there a key difference between the two? Marcus, what are your thoughts around what are the two differences between CCPA and GDPR?
Well, fundamentally, there are a fair few differences, but in a nutshell, as in GDPR requires you to have a legal basis for processing personal data, whereas CCPA doesn't have this particular aspect, but the CCPA focus is effectively on limiting the selling of personal information, like you alluded to earlier on, and there are also further provisions in terms of the articles dealing with mergers and acquisitions, in terms of opting out, providing opting out rights if data is altered from the original time of capture in terms of its use. Both have the rights to be forgotten and rights for information, for example, and those are relatively similar. But perhaps most importantly, as in both, do need to have a foundation of a good and solid data governance framework to get it into the right place.
Yeah, that's a good point. They both need to have a strong enterprise information management system, or you know, it can be a daunting task just to put that together as you're getting ready for these requirements. Totally good. Thanks, Marcus. Good points. So let's talk about some common challenges and some best practices that we've seen across our client base. You know, Paradigm's helped organizations of all sizes and all maturity with CCPA, from simple assessments to full automation. Investing time up front really is for proper analysis is a key planning component. So that way you can feel confident that your CCPA program will effectively mitigate risk while meeting business objectives. So while we have you all here, why don't we take a quick poll of the audience and see where you all are at in CCPA maturity. Please, as I'm discussing, you know, some best practices and common challenges here, please fill out the poll, and then we'll take a look at the results at the end. But let's discuss common challenges and best practices with an applicable use case. We work with the largest auto lender in the US, a great partner. You know, their challenges are very similar to what we often see with our clients. You know, addressing CCPA and other regulations, as well as audit exposure, standardizing terms in a dictionary across the organization, and collaboration between technology and each of the different business areas. How do their experts help them? We help them by using a roadmap that not only enabled CCPA compliance, but as an added bonus, enabled a robust data management facility. But you know, their challenges, how do we tackle the challenges? As you can see, I'll just follow it across the top here. First off, the gap. Our team, Marcus and others, came in and worked between the business and the technology organizations to say, hey, what is the gap of knowledge of CCPA and the regulations and the audit components that we're trying to tackle here, and see, we get a feel as to where they are and where they feel that they are in the process, similar to the poll that we're doing now. The second big one, as you can imagine, is locating the data. Trying to find the data in an organization that in marketing has Marketo with their Marketo cloud and data there, as well as, you know, data marts on premise. In the sales organization, they have their Salesforce cloud, plus a number of subsets of data. The service organization has their own Salesforce cloud, so it doesn't even combine with the Salesforce data. They have their own data, and then the finance team has an enterprise data warehouse along with lots of data. And then lastly, technologies has a data lake in AWS. So really locating the data, using technology to not only both, you know, getting out there and finding out where the data is from to the owners, but also using technologies like data privacy management from Informatica or enterprise data catalog. Those were very effective in helping us find the data, categorize the data, and really see the data as to, you know, where it is, what it is, and how it is. Which is a huge first step in as we're looking at the common challenges and the best practices to go tackle them. The next one was tracking and managing consent. The great news is this organization was already on a customer 360 journey, meaning they were mastering their customer already. By analyzing that and then adding another domain or component to the platform for consent mastering, we were able to combine consent mastering, customer mastering, and put it in the overall platform to better analyze across the organization the exposure for CCPA and other regulations. Thirdly, SLAs and audit. We were able to enable that through the use of tools such as Axon from Informatica, which provided an opportunity to bring teams together so that they could identify what are the common SLAs across the organization and for the individual, so we can track and better manage and monitor that. But also, how do we actually report out using this platform to the auditors, both internal and external? It was very, very effective. And last but not least, how do we help take this technology and also point it so that we can start identifying from the requesters of data, the individuals out there who live in California, the specific lookbacks and the restore components. So the platform was very effective. And as you can see, a lot of the impact of that effect was the increased efficiency of 18%, rationalizing 50,000 data definitions across the organization, which is a bit of a Herculean task. And most importantly, increasing the adoption from the business by 23%, and that continues to go up month after month, which is fantastic. So there's a great example of how our experts helped a large auto lender to impact their CCPA program. So how did the poll come out, Nicola? Great. It looks like 80% are into SLAs and audits, 60% are at tracking and managing consent, 40% are locating data, and 20% are gap analysis, and 100% are requesting data. So fantastic. Looks like we have a pretty good mature audience here. As this roadmap will be very effective, especially when we start discussing where it can help and which parts are the best posts to jump into. So this all begs the question that I think you're all asking. What's the best roadmap to CCPA compliance? Marcus, why don't you give me your quick thoughts, and maybe you could then pass it off to Jerry.
Yeah, sure. So fundamentally, it's all about creating a defensible position, yeah, so, in terms of CCPA compliance. So there's some critical steps that one needs to look out for in terms of being able to achieve this. So just like what the poll was mentioning, you'll want to be mapping your consumer data so your audits can prove compliance. You need to have up-to-date data privacy disclosures. You need to be able to create your corporate processes for handling consumer requests and training your employees as well in these processes that you just created. You need to also be able to identify and implement process and system changes based on those compliance gaps, and as well as perform regular data security reviews to cover both the worlds of IT and business. So these are the typical things that you'll need to be thinking about in terms of creating a defensible position in order to be CCPA compliant. Now, ultimately, you know, where we've started with clients is if they're unsure of their current maturity levels, then we try sort of like a trial audit effectively to pull out the gaps in terms of whether you have data challenges, process ones, or systemic ones, and above all, ensuring that we get an accurate view on the people that you've got and their understanding of how data correlates to the CCPA regulations, and enabling comms and training in that sense. Ultimately, as in it is really about your people, yeah, that are then subsequently guided by the business driver of regulatory compliance. And so, so I believe that Jerry's got a couple examples through a subsequent demo on different areas on how to cover these particular gaps as an example.
Yeah, thanks, Marcus. And obviously, part of the reason why we talk about this idea of a technology and a consulting slash advisor approach is, look, you take something like CCPA, right, and different companies can interpret the feedback differently and the regulations differently, and that walks us through sort of the 6-part step that we put together. And we essentially put this together because more times than I can count, people would ask us, like, how would you suggest, right? From a data perspective, Informatica has been we've been in the data management space for around 30 years. Obviously, the Paradigm folks have been doing this for a number of years as well. And so we put together this sort of unified solution from steps 1 through 6. And at a high level, and we'll walk through some of this as well, but if you think about it, right, the first step is very closely aligned to a majority of what Marcus was talking about, right? So how do I manage, maintain my governance? Where do I store those policies? Do I have workflows that need to be approached to make sure that every step is ticked off? But then on the other end of the spectrum, I need to find all that personal sensitive data, right? There are a number of different options for this, from just trying to catalog your information to the other end of the spectrum, which is kind of where we lie, which is being able to sort of find both data domains of data types, as well as pre-built rules around finding what sensitive data should look like. And then if you follow that around to step number 3, right, it's this idea of consent. Clearly, that's a key indicator for CCPA and a lot of the other regulations that are coming out throughout the US and certainly for GDPR as well. And that's the idea of having a managed set of and mastered set of data around what customers do you have, or what partners do you have, or what vendors do you have, and then assigning that with the levels of consent, so you're not having to store it multiple times throughout the organization for different departments. Okay, so if you tie those 3 things together, what you start getting is step number 4, which is the ability for somebody to see what is my risk potential. Right? What is protected, what's exposed, what needs to be remediated, and having that sort of dashboard view that you use for internal purposes, as well as sharing with regulators as you provide that level of specificity and protected data to say, okay, this is where all my systems are. Now I know where it is. I know what's been done to resolve that or remediate that. That's step 4. Step 5 comes under the idea of not only protecting the data, but then also being able to reply to rights requests, right? So a number of folks talking about, clearly they're in the, the resolution stage, or rather, feedback stage, when a customer asks for information that they house on them. How do I respond to that? And again, a lot of times, even still, I'm just hearing the same responses that, it's kind of a manual process. I have to go by the person. I have to be able to look at whether I've responded to it within the time period required. I need to go find the data. I send a bunch of requests out. So if you think about tying the first couple steps together in an automated process, number 5 should be automated. And that's one of the things that we talk about. And that's the solution that we have at Paradigm. And number 6 is, the ability to sort of not only look at it from an operational standpoint, but also be able to sort of propagate that information to either internal or external shareholders, and providing that level of high level readiness and high level scoring that says this is where we've been also over time. Are we getting better? Are we not getting better? How do we sort of make those improvements? What categories do we need to target? And that kind of flows us through the first 6 steps.
That's fantastic. Thanks, Jerry. Hey, Jerry, this obviously this is a very in-depth process. How long does a typical CCPA project take to go live?
Well, I mean, we have some customers in production that were able to go live within 4 or 5 months. And that's without having anything in place, from scanning the data to applying some level of process around that. And then to the other end, to maintaining and managing some of their consent data, and then also being able to respond to subject access requests. So I know it seems like a lot of steps, right? 1 through 6 to get to the finish line, but they were able to implement the entire process within that time frame, okay? Another thing that's probably important to point out is the second, so that's usually the first question. The second question I always get is, well, do I have to follow? I know you numbered it 1 through 6. Do I have to start at 1 before I get to 2, before I get to 3? And the short answer is no, and actually nobody does. But at a minimum, some of these go in parallel. And look, the biggest contention a lot of times is around, well, if I start just documenting my stuff now, the regulation is already live. By the time I get my processes done, I'll already be hitting fines and I'll be having a problem there. So, I mean, this information is somewhere, right? The benefit of having it kind of housed centrally is the idea that everybody's sort of singing off the same hymnal, right? So everybody knows what processes we're trying to employ. And again, selfishly, from our perspective, we sort of have a command center that we advertise with customers around being able to see everything that's happening and the other steps in one. But the short answer is no, not everybody has to go through all the single steps.
Yeah, that's then we've been joined with you on this journey as well, and it's the same thing as we see. Even within 30 days, the great news is, as oftentimes is the first step through GAP and locating data is really the ability to expose that within the first couple of days through a number of components, so that people can actually see the data and make decisions. I was also wondering, a lot of our clients we're seeing often use things like OneTrust to manage policy management and workflows. Do I need both solutions, or how does that come about? Do I need 15 solutions to put this together? Do I need a platform? What are you seeing there?
400 products, and you have this whole thing done. No, so yes, so we actually have a partnership with OneTrust, right? OneTrust does provide a lot of guidance, and they have good legal teams on staff if you have questions when you're working on sort of the step 1, right? And one of the reasons why they partner with us is because although they have traditionally they've had this process from a spreadsheet format where you fill out content to be able to determine where your data assets are. Now, they have acquired a higher level cataloging capability, but they still partner with us on like enterprise scale projects, because from let's call that step 2, right? Where do I find the data? How do I manage the data? How do I crawl and find where all these different areas are? We've been doing that. We've been doing data classification and cataloging for like 10 years, right? But from a step 1 on a governance policy perspective, yeah, they've made some great inroads. They have some great templates with that. On the downside, it misses some of the stuff that we'll see today, some of the dashboards around all the different pieces we have, but we have plenty of APIs that go back and forth between OneTrust and Informatica.
Oh, fantastic. So it's a well-integrated solution. It can be used because it really faces, I think what you said, with a lot of business areas, especially with the legal team, and it's a great integration point, or they can utilize the tools that you got. Hey, maybe you and Marcus could kind of address this one for me. One of the questions that came up on the Q&A was, what do you see as the biggest obstacle to CCPA adoption?
Oh,
Jerry, Marcus, you guys want to take a step?
I see Marcus is still on mute, so I'll jump in first. I'll take the easy answer, and he'll have to do the hard one. From our joint solution, right? The easier part for us is all the scanning and finding the data, which is typically a hard part of the problem, and or not knowing what data becomes a challenge. But it's probably not going to be a surprise, my answer, right? The bigger part of the problem, or the hardest part, is getting those governance committees established and finding the right stakeholders and having people assigned and determining what policies you want to use and determining what the process of what that might mean. Meaning, you've got a policy with a number of different regulations. Well, there's sort of the what does that mean, and then how, how are we going to address it? And so determining that gap, it's easy to copy and paste text from a regulation and put it into a document. But then it's another thing to say, and this is something that we spent a lot of time working with customers on, just a very basic one, like somebody has the right to be forgotten. Well, what does that mean? What if we have a legal hold on that person, so we can't just blow them out of the system? Do we anonymize it? Do we mask it? Do we archive it? Right? Those are decisions that are, quite candidly, from what we know so far, is undefined necessarily from the regulation itself. So those are decisions, and that's one of the reasons why Paradigm has been so helpful, is guiding customers as to what the right approach is based on their data needs. But establishing that whole process does become a little bit burdensome. And that's what I've seen as for me, that's what I've seen as one of the bigger obstacles. Sorry, Marcus, go ahead.
Oh yeah, I mean, it sounds a bit, but other things that we've seen is sort of ensuring that you have the right exec level sponsorship as well as grassroots enthusiasm to make it real and to make it kind of why should I care about this type of approach that you typically find in larger organizations where data governance is one of those topics which doesn't necessarily always mean a whole lot of things other than what are the activities that I need to perform from a data steward perspective, or even from a value perspective from an exec level. Now, those are the types of areas that we can sort of assist potential clients with in terms of defining, why they should be worried about these types of things other than servicing the regulations, because there is a heck of a lot of value in your data, and that needs to be brought out in a way that is conducive for both different audiences within the tools that are supplied. So you mentioned kind of scanning, Jerry. That's one side of the equation. Another side is stated lineage, where effectively you'll plug in the gaps with the business aspects or business assets, if you like, that don't necessarily tie in with the world of IT quite as succinctly. And so there you end up with a heck of a lot of UDAs or UCs, end user computing kind of spreadsheets, that kind of stuff. And that needs to be captured somewhere within within the world of compliance, just purely because it might not form your formal IT world, but it might be required as part of the compliance steps to ensure that you know that you know where your data is, regardless whether it's in a formal IT system or whether it's in one of those shadow IT functions that get created.
Now, those are great points, gentlemen. And one of the key things I always focus in on is what is that impact? What's the excitement both from the executive level and from the overall organization, right? If you don't have the excitement, you don't have the engagement. It needs to. That's one of the first things to really work on and bring those teams together. And all the other key points you brought up were great. Maybe Jerry, why don't you take us through some of the technologies that you've seen be really helpful in driving, these best practices and helping people meet their compliance needs?
Yeah, sure. Like we said, we wanted to kind of give you a little bit of a highlight. Does everybody see my screen? I should be. Yep. Showing. Yeah. Obviously, when we do this with a little bit more detail, it takes a little bit more depth. So we're going to kind of scan some of the higher level stuff, but we'll also want to sort of tie in some of the points that we just made, right? So, I can run through some of this, and if we have time at the end, there's questions, I can drill in more detail in certain functions, but I wanted to show you kind of some high level capabilities, right? So come in initially, right? This is obviously our governance tool from Informatica with a number of different capabilities and a bunch of accelerators built in for CCPA. One of which is this sort of sample dashboard that you come in at and gives you some high level metrics around quality of my data, because a lot of people think about, well, I know where it is, I think I know what it is, and then we go in and we start doing scans like Marcus was talking about, and we find data that's hidden in multiple areas. There's different duplicates, and I know about this one because this is the one I primarily use. I didn't know about the other 5. So after we do a scan, and what I had alluded to earlier is this ability to sort of bubble all this up to more of a for the sort of compliance and legal teams, which are ultimately responsible for this types of stuff, and just some kind of high level metrics here, right? So what's the quality, accuracy, validity, timeliness, right? Sort of those 5. Then just some high level stuff around systems that are being signed with CCPA. But then if I look down here, right, what also is, of course, pretty important is, well, okay, what policies are defined that don't have processes, right? Or a glossary of terms, right? We kind of jokingly think about that from an IT standpoint sometimes, but how do I really know what that means? I gave an example earlier around, well, what do I do if I know what the regulation is, but I don't know what the policy is? Well, that's actually technically another term, right, that I want to store. So what does that kind of mean to us? Not just the text verbatim. So these are CCPA glossary items without stakeholders, 84. We mentioned this earlier from, how do I manage and maintain my process, right? So if I just look at a high level, CCPA policies without processes, right? So I come in here, this becomes dynamic, right? So it brings me down to those 26. Again, we could spend, an hour or so going through this. I'll give you kind of a 10-cent tour right now, but just some high level stuff that we see is these are what are called sort of the facets, data sets, right? The actual data objects, attributes. Most people probably know what attributes are, but the different systems that were brought in and reviewed, right? Now, the context of system is a little interesting, right? So you notice that there's 59 systems and 130 data sets. So if you think about it from a business object perspective, right? You say, well, I have a CRM system, right? Well, the CRM system may consist of 14 different subsystems, but for purposes of setting policy and setting regulations, I want to set it at the system level so that it automatically sort of permeates down, and then I can also associate different systems, data sets, or data objects as a filtered down approach, right? And that's where systems are here. Glossary, we mentioned that earlier, the glossary of terms. Data quality, we'll get into that in a little bit too, in terms of seeing a detailed level of quality from my assets. And then roles and policies, right? Clearly policies is important. Then you notice, 0 or 56, right? So I knew the ones that I'm looking at do not have a process, right? So policy is kind of, my interpretation of what the regulation is, and then a process is what am I going to do about it, okay? So if we sort of drill into identifiers, right, that's one that I want to take a look at. Again, sort of this cascading effect. I can see under personal information categories was the hierarchy, under CCPA policy is the higher level idea. So my descriptions in here, I get to see at a higher level what's the status, when's it effective, who created it, what life cycles in proposed, right? So this hasn't actually been propagated yet. And then I have some other key categories here, sort of what makes this up, okay? And this is then sort of a definition of the regulation and the policy. So if I want to sort of traverse the context here, where it stands, right? So it's under informational categories, again, under CCPA policy, right? The summary, of course, is what summary would be, okay? These are all the stakeholders, whether they be key stakeholders or subsequent stakeholders, right? And you can see I've got 38, right? 3 of them are from the data set and 35 are from a glossary standpoint, who the owners are, who the names are, what the org unit. You can see, well, I hope you can see, right? So anything that's kind of like a lighter blue is something that can be drilled in on. All the objects can be linked back and forth. What I wanted to bring your attention to is sort of the impact, right? So again, this policy for identifiers impacts all these glossary terms, right? But if I go to the regulation, okay, what I notice is, again, I kind of knew this already, right? But it's not associated with any type of process, right? So if I come under impact and I come under process, now I can come in, again, without going in, typically we'll have sort of the user and then we'll have sort of somebody with different permissions. But of course I have the permissions to come in. I can now associate this as a regulating process. Now, all these can be kind of defined as part of your implementation plan. And again, this is where folks like Paradigm are helpful in helping you not over-assign as well as not under-creating different relationship types and processes. Of course, the ones we see are the ones that come with the system. But just consider this a policy regulating, right? And what process is it assigned to? You think of this, everybody talks a lot of these days around this sort of graph idea, right, of how many different many-to-many relationships that I could have, which again, of course, gets very confusing to think about, but we try and make it a little bit more associative here with these, cascading ideas. So we'll apply this to customer analytics, right? And then of course, everything else comes up. The process owner that was there, it's Kate Armory. This is a reference indicator, right? So if I save and close, now I've assigned this a process to this policy. If I were to come back, and let me just come back here, right? If I come back to the summary page in real time, now I've got 25, right? So I can kind of work my process down, because that becomes, a lot of companies kind of celebrate, hey, we made a decision, but in the end, you're not getting any value until you're actually using it, right? So as you're operationalizing your process and how do I make my life easier, these are some of the things that sort of come with it, out of the box. Now, if I start over, right, and just do a generic search, right? So I'm in here, let's clear all this out, right? So my entire system has 130 data sets, right? We mentioned 59 systems, right? So nothing's been sort of filtered down right now. I'm in the policy facet, okay, because I was working on policies before. So I just want to see what CCPA policies I have, right? And this, again, being context sensitive, filters the items for me automatically based on what I typed in, because it knows I have a CCPA policy, right? So now I've got my high level name, right? It's a top level parent. Here's the details, right? Some more descriptions at a higher level. I want to drill into this. You notice I'm still filtered on policy. I have this ability, if I wanted to co-view in the search field, just based on the data set and the attributes or all that kind of stuff by itself. But I can then drill into the policy here. And similarly, you notice some of the same objects, right? I get for 99% of the people that are online here, these obviously seem like a lot of different options, but hopefully you'll kind of notice the same ones apply across, right? Everything has an impact to something else. Is there data related to it? What history, of course, and change, who's the stakeholders, every single facet or every single object has that same framework assigned to it and the same idea down here. Obviously, if I don't have access, I won't have this edit field here. Follow is also pretty good, so I get notifications if something changes, whether I'm a direct or stakeholder or not. If I'm indirect, I want to be able to follow it. I get notified if something changes, so I don't have to come into the tool all the time, okay? I'm going to come over here in a second. I'm going to launch off to this. But before I do that, let me just come back here real quick, because I want to show you this map, right? So if you noticed, okay, I'm still filtered on CCPA policies, right? But before I was looking at the details, now I want to see kind of the map. And the map is sort of that lineage diagram that Marcus mentioned earlier and that visual cue of what's transpiring. Now, if you remember, I had originally defined this as system lineage, which is a higher level view. So NSE rewards makes up a number of different subsystems. But again, at a high level, I want to see my system information, but then I can start using these overlays, right? These are pretty powerful. Now I can overlay the data sets, the glossary terms, but the first thing I want to take a look at are different policies, right? So now I could see per system, again, which is a superset of lower level data objects, right? I can see all the different policies that are here or not here, right? I have this ability to come in here. If I have a ton, I can filter it by certain things. Oh, if I have 27 different objects, I can filter by the ones I want with all the wildcard stuff you'd imagine. But same idea, right? We see identifiers applied here. I click on it, I see it's related to every single one. If I can take the same option here, and let's just bring this back down. And rather than system level, if I do want to see the data sets, I can do that in the same view. And now, of course, it's a lot more admittedly confusing because there's a lot more stuff going on. So maybe I pop this out to its own window. I can see it better, right? If I come back here to data lineage, I can see it better, but it's still a little bit more confusing because these are all the systems that are related here. Now, again, depending on your access and depending on your control, you can also come into here and you can view these different objects, right? Again, we think about the demarcation of the different user types, right? We have our business, data stewards, legal folks that typically look at the system level, and we've got kind of our business analysts and our system SI slash technical folks that'll start going down to a little bit more detail here and looking at the actual system names, what the data quality is, what the data elements are at that tier, okay? And also what domains were assigned. So remember I mentioned earlier this idea that I can look at, I could assign a domain or classification of similar attributes to a data set. And that's what these domains are, right? So we come with a host of domains. We have our own artificial intelligence and machine learning that runs behind the scenes, that if it sees similar data, it could tag it, you can accept it or reject it, and then have it boil up into your kind of view here, right? So without getting into any more detail here, let me jump back real quick and let me show you an association. Yeah, we'll come back here under the CCPA policy. And I had mentioned this idea here, right? So the security or classification. Now I could see in one of these guys, if I go back to system level, right, just so it's a little bit easier to see, I can overlay my data privacy stuff, right? So ultimately the idea is to assign privacy policies and protection status. So if we think about what we were mentioning earlier, this idea that I want to know what the quality and validity, as well as whether it's protected or exposed and what's my risk, I can see all that here. If I wanted to drill into the details, right, we have this associated link here that brings me right into our DPM tool. And just log in. Okay. And because we're on CCPA, right, it gives me the details of what's making up that CCPA classification. Now, a classification is probably something else that requires a little bit of clarity, which is you've got, there are other companies, not a ton, but there's other companies that do scanning and can do fuzzy matching, or fuzzy matching they're not that great at, but it can do some level of scanning and kind of like finds. But the idea of classification takes that to a new tier. So we've already talked about the concepts of data domains, which is to say that I've got similar data. Phone number is an easy one, right? It looks like a phone number and it's different from a social security number, right? For Marcus, his number is weird because he's over in the UK. So he's got this weird 44 in front of it. So how do I know what area codes are out there? Do I realize that that's actually an area, that's actually a phone number and not some kind of social security number in the US, right? Those types of things. So those are kind of domains. What a classification policy does is it takes those domains to another level into what you see here, which is associating those values based on categories that I've assigned. So you can see if this or this and or this. So it is essentially saying, and again, we have a bunch of them for CCPA as well as GDPR, but it's essentially saying, well, I not only want to have a domain and I want to tag it as a domain, so I want to see that data element itself. But for the higher level system or for the higher level business process, I want to know these are all the areas that are assigned to California Consumer Protection Act, right? So these are CCPA objects, and these are the ones that I really need to worry about. Now you can see that this contains 34 different data domains that are applied in this level, right? Kind of back to here, as well as 13 different data stores this is being applied to. So this is being run on 13 different data stores, and it's been run 9 times, okay? Now, without getting into setting it up and stuff like that, I mean, those are things that you can decide. Again, it's another area that Paradigm's been helpful with the number of customers and saying, well, based on your propensity to sell in these different regions that own California customers, right? How much do you have to be able to, do you need to actually assess? But if I come in by default, like we did when we went into the Axon tool, right? This is kind of your high level dashboard about what's going on from a protection standpoint, okay? These are all my data stores. This is the sensitive data by data store group. I want to know by department. I can filter here, I think, real quick. And just see the ones that are CCPA, right? So the only data set as a data store that's assigned to CCPA is the rewards data store group. And within that data store group are these 4 data stores, okay? Consent, we mentioned the idea from a master data solution. I want to associate my consent elements there as well as some of the reward systems and so forth. So if I drill into that, I can see the proliferation of that data, meaning, well, okay, where is that going to, or where's that coming from? And so this particular object, the data reward system that we looked at, has these 11 different domains, that are then being proliferated, say that again, proliferated to the data warehouse, okay? And the data warehouse has got another, not the same, probably I think it's the same 9, going to the retail marketing campaign. So I have to, but if I know that it's being fed from here, I don't have to change it 10 times, right? I change it in one system, or I wall off the retail reward system, and then I feed off the other ones and anonymize that downstream if I have to do that, okay? For the sake of time, there's a number of different things that I was going to go through here. But for the sake of time, let me kind of get to the subject registry, right? And subject registry is the idea that I want to be able to provide feedback on what sensitive data I house on you, what am I doing with it, what's the purpose, right? All the different tenets of CCPA. So not that you want to go in here manually and do it every single time, but just to put it in context, all this is API enabled. Right, so because we've been in data management space, I threw kind of a cheeky statement out there about how other companies can do some level of matching. And look, a lot of our competitors were kind of OEM some of our matching capabilities, at least they used to till we cut them off. But so we've kind of been the golden standard when it comes to that, right? So, but if I drill into this guy here, right, I typed in John. This doesn't even look like John. It's totally unrelated, but it came up. Had 30 records in total. I come in, and now I can see all the different data stores that are affecting John, right? So we noticed that there were 4 earlier. These 3 are associated with him. Of those 3 data stores, I've got 9 fields that are affected from the retail data warehouse, blah, 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 a high-level view of him. And then you've got this option here to prepare the DSAR or CCPA report, okay? Now, again, like I said, I can come in here manually and do it. Or I obviously, in a production environment, and the examples we gave you earlier, those guys are using the APIs and sort of delivering the feedback out to other people downstream. You also see whether it's shared with a third party, right? That's kind of key. I need to indicate this information to my customers. What am I doing with it? What's the purpose? And all that data either can reside in the Axon data governance tool, right? And then I would associate that with my report. Or there's fields in here, if you're not using our Axon tool, say you're using OneTrust or something, you want to import that in, we can use that as part of the import process into here. So I have my report ready to go and ready to run whenever somebody requests that information.
Hey, Jerry, what's the red dot for?
Oh yeah, I almost forgot. So that's kind of a good question, right? So because we've been in the privacy and sensitive data discovery and data management and archiving space for a while, so we have this flag that says this guy's under legal hold, right? So whether there's a legal action that's against the company, or there was some other security problem that we had, so this guy's under legal hold. So it automatically, it assigns based on the timing how long the legal hold is. It'll drop after the period is set when you've set the legal hold. And this also then would be part of my decision-making process of what I can and can't do, right? I'm not gonna be able to purge this guy because I have to maintain this guy's data, right? And I can't completely anonymize it because there's other options out there. Some people are just, their version of masking is just putting X's through all the data, and that makes it completely unusable, right? So we've got repeatable masking capabilities so that I can find a person. I've got ways to make it so I can never undo it, right? For super secure data. And we're also getting into sort of the encryption space as well for some of those things.
Excellent, thanks, Jerry. The great news is you all have been doing this for so long. You have so many platforms along with us as well, but so many key technology components that you've worked on for years that you've fed into these technologies to really make them much more robust than anybody else that I've seen out there. So kudos to you all.
Thank you, thank you. Yeah, I didn't get a chance to show it, and hopefully we'll get a chance to do it another time. We also have it's not new anymore, but we have an option within our data governance tool for Marketplace, where once I've curated data sets and I know what the context is, users can come in and request certain data sets for their use, for their departmental use or their organizational use. And I can then still see all the information that was housed and what the risk elements are, what the data quality elements are of it. And I can decide, well, this is something I want to use for my purpose. We see this a ton now with everybody going to the cloud, and they got stuff out in S3, and they've got stuff out in Azure. And you notice some of that from a scanning perspective probably earlier here too, because from a you know, from a data management perspective, that's one of the ones that we have, right, that you may have saw just as soon as I logged in the overview tab here, right? So, because we scan all that stuff as well. And it's also something that people kind of forget about now when you get these new quote unquote data warehouses. All these other objects out there too. I want to decide, okay, well now I've got this new lake, right, which has now become the new swamp from the older deep swamp that it used to have. And I've now created an entirely new set of risk and exposure. So,
Fantastic.
yeah, from a product perspective and from a delivery perspective, this is something that we obviously feel pretty proud about. We've got a number of customers that are super happy. We've got some customers that are using this as their certainly in the GDPR space, which has been around longer. They've been using this to work with regulators, right, and say, look, this is the health of our data. This is where we do or don't have any privacy concerns or protection concerns. And, you know, they've been getting green marks across the board. So
That's
before I go on
fantastic.
for another 2 hours, yeah, let me go ahead and
No, that's fantastic.
stop sharing real quick.
You know, the great news about the system, the technologies that you introduced is it's not just CCPA specific, as you and I talked about previously and really focused in on, but GDPR you had mentioned, IFRS 17, there's various different regulations and different components that can be used with different pieces. You know, we are at the end of time, so we will send you back an email with the answers to Q&As, additional Q&A that has been proposed. I've weaved that into most of our discussion here. Well, but bottom line, we're really here to help. Paradigm and Informatica are great partners, and we've helped organizations of all sizes and maturity with CCPA, from simple assessments to full automation. Please contact us. We're more than willing to, you know, if you'd like a complimentary half-day workshop, we're available to help, and just email us and we will coordinate that with you and your teams and do a deep dive into, you know, where you're at and help you with that first step to the gaps. Thank you all for your time today. Marcus, thank you for your insights. Jerry, thanks to you for your insights. Please, everybody, stay healthy and strong out there and travel safe.